Continuing now in the frame of Frankenstein, that is the story that surrounds the story, we see in letter 3 that Robert Walton has pursued his quest for the North Pole and gone further north into northern Archangel and then onwards into the pole. And he himself finds himself longing for a friend, longing for somebody to share this victory and this glory with. But he also finds himself, consequently, in a spiritual state which is very much like the ice and snow region that he's in. Sterile, removed from human existence, lacking warmth. In his letter, then, his third letter to his sister, he says that he will see success. He will find this pole, and he will succeed at what he desires to find. He's confident about it. Robert Walton then is pushing the limits of human understanding and discovery and thought. What can stop a human being from doing such things? Men are capable of doing anything, right? We're capable of going anywhere, right? And with impunity. We're successful in everything we do. There's nothing that threatens us at all. We can accomplish great marvels. And again, this is very much like the Enlightenment idea. The Enlightenment idea that human beings can be masters of their own destiny. Now, on the positive side of the Enlightenment, briefly, there is a greatness to what the Enlightenment thinkers were considering, that human beings could be free of all the things that weighed them down, all the things that made them oppressed and kept in place, and they could strive to journey and discover anywhere in the universe. There's a greatness of thought there. It's true. But what Shelley seems to be bringing up here is that that same greatness of thought also has a problem of hubris attached to it. The breaking of every human boundary and going where no one has gone before sometimes gets human beings into very dangerous situations. The reason we have the laws around us, or the reason that we have the customs around us, are in some ways in order that we might survive, in order that we might stay human. And when we breach those customs and breach those boundaries, we end up being something non-human, becoming something that is in some ways dead, lifeless, cold. This deadness and lifelessness and coldness we begin to see in the fourth letter that Robert Walton writes to his sister. Here he is writing basically from the North Pole, almost. He's in the ice there, in the Arctic. And he says he's surrounded by ice. The whole ship is surrounded by ice and trapped in the ice. Again, like the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Coleridge. And as they're there in the ice, he says, we perceived first a vision of something tremendous, something huge. He writes this in the following. We perceived a low carriage fixed on a sledge and drawn by dogs pass on towards the north, at the distance of 1/2 mile. A being which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched the rapid progress of the traveler with our telescopes until it was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. So the first thing we get in the text is that Robert Walton and his crew see in the distance this figure of gigantic proportions traveling across the ice. It is true that apparently the air and the remoteness of landscape in the Arctic tend to distort visions, that sometimes things do appear larger in the distance in the Arctic than they really are. But nevertheless, what Robert Walton says he sees is something which seems to be of gigantic proportions. It's almost like angelic traveling across the ice. He has a vision of something tremendous passing far off in the distance, in his view, though. And it's right after that they find a character who comes on board their ship. And this is Victor Frankenstein. And the text says the following. There was a human being within the sled, whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not, as the other travelers seemed to be, a savage inhabitant of some undiscovered island, but a European. His manners were so conciliating and gentle that the sailors were all interested in him, although they have had very little communication with him. For my own part, I began to love him as a brother, and his constant and deep grief filled me with sympathy and compassion. The man that they bring on board is Victor Frankenstein, who comes on board right after this vision of a gigantic person passes off in the distance. And here comes Victor Frankenstein on board. Now technically, Victor is found while they're in the ice, and we find out in the story that he's there pursuing this creature that he has made. But In Robert Walton's letters, notice, the finding of Victor Frankenstein and the seeing of this tremendously great being, this vision of the creature in the distance, come right after he said, "I long for a friend." It's not coincidental, because Robert Walton has himself trapped himself so much in the ice, metaphorically speaking, so isolated himself from community, that he is beginning to manifest his desire for a friend. That is, it's almost as though his desire for a friend takes on physical form in Victor Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein comes on board the ship, and he is the embodiment of everything that Robert Walton desired. Somebody of great, capacious intellect, seeking the truth, questing for the outer reaches of human capability, somebody of nobility and gentleness, somebody that he can relate to and tell all of his inner thoughts. This is something which is remarkably coincidental, that right after he says this, Victor Frankenstein comes on board the ship. Now, we could say that this character in literature is simply a coincidental that it comes on right at the moment that Robert Walton is desiring a friend. But we could also say that he is the manifestation of Robert Walton's desire for a friend. That same desire that we could say is a desire also for the unknown, for God, for the metaphysical, takes its shape in Victor Frankenstein, who is preceded by a doppelganger in the form of the creature. So, to make it a little bit simpler, the creature, Frankenstein, Victor, and Robert Walton are three different manifestations of the same character. In some ways, Victor Frankenstein may not be real. How can we say that? Well, on the one hand, all the letters are written by Robert Walton. There is nobody else to confirm that what's happening here happens. Only Robert Walton's letters confirm this. And consequently, the frame around the story, which does give verisimilitude to the story, also throws into question the possibility that these things are real or unreal. Robert Walton himself, being trapped in the ice for as long as he was, we could see is a little bit unhinged. He is not quite sane anymore. And it may be that what he is seeing or what he's experiencing is no more than the manifestation of his own ideas, his desires, his longing. And like the character of Pygmalion falling in love with his creation Galatea in ancient Greek mythology, Robert Walton might be seeing in Victor Frankenstein his own creation and falling in love with it. He says later on in that same letter, "My affection for my guest increases every day. He excites at once my admiration and my pity to an astonishing degree. How can I see so noble a creature destroyed by misery without feeling the most poignant grief? He is so gentle, yet so wise. His mind is so cultivated, and when he speaks, although his words are cold with the choicest art, yet they flow with rapidity and unparalleled eloquence." That whole experience of seeing in this man a pitiable creature who is also noble, we see that same thing in the character of Gollum in Tolkien's work. We see it later on with other characters in movies where the character has a split personality, or where their idea manifests itself as a real person, for instance, like in the series Heroes. We see this image that Mary Shelley creates as being something which is real in the context of the story, but might not be real because we don't get any evidence that he actually exists. One way or the other, Robert Walton tells Victor Frankenstein about his desire for finding a friend, and he expresses his conviction that a man could boast a little happiness who did not enjoy the blessing of a friend. Without a friend, you're nothing, I suppose. But then later on, he calls him divine wanderer as well, something like an angel come down to earth. So that here, Robert Walton is describing Victor Frankenstein as noble and admirable, but he's also describing him using terms which seem to indicate that Victor Frankenstein is like a demonic force, at the same time that he's an angelic force. And it's this very thing which Robert Walton seems to admire in him, and I think Robert Walton admires in himself, too. This breaking of the bonds of law and rule, which then make him separate from the rest of society, of human society. And Victor then tells the story to Robert Walton in the context of this frame. And from here on we get Victor telling us what he did with this great knowledge that he had.